Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back. We're going to do another video on criminal justice reform. But before we get into that, please like, subscribe, share with your friends, give me some comments. If you disagree with what I'm saying, please dislike and tell me why in the comments that you think I'm wrong. We'll have a little discussion about it. I'm open-minded. You may prove me wrong, but then again, I can convince you of my way of thinking. Now, I'm changing the format of the way we do the criminal justice videos, and you'll see it in certain videos that I'm very passionate about, because I tend to get off topic or I go on a rant as opposed to giving you good information. So the way we're going to do these, and we're going to do quite a few of them, is I'm going to give you some facts and figures and talk about certain aspects, and then we'll go into certain parts of the criminal justice system. And today we're going to talk about segregation within state prisons. And they're very similar because a lot of it is mandated because of Supreme Court decisions or federal laws that have been passed to ensure the safety of the offenders themselves, which is important, and believe it or not, corrections officers do care about it. But as we delve into this, and I'm going to keep restating the same figure as it goes up and down, but right now in the criminal justice system, there are 2.2 million people incarcerated between city, county, state, and federal facilities. That's prisons, your local jails, and that fluctuates a little bit daily because people are released, people are sentenced to move from the county jail to a state prison, or they're moved from a federal holding facility to a federal prison. But that's where we're sitting at, 2.2 million. Now, with that, the part that's rarely talked about is 4.7 that are considered on paper, and that's on probation or parole. And of that number, some will successfully complete it, others will develop issues, or they cannot beat their addiction and they won't report to their parole officer, or they will burn their urinalysis, and some will end up getting sent back even if it's only for a short time. With that being said, working in a prison, you would see people that came back in for a parole violation. And many would argue that what they did was unjust, but other ones were fairly honest with, I didn't report, or I couldn't stop doing meth or heroin, and that's why I'm back. And some of them you feel sorry for, and sometimes they just cannot, there's too much freedom for them to live within the constraints of their probation or parole, and eventually they'll come back to prison and they just won't want a parole. They'll want to complete their sentence, or what offenders and corrections officers refer to as 12-12ing. And that is, they complete their sentence and they walk away and are not restricted in any way. With some offenders, this can be a good thing. With others, maybe it's better to put them in a position where they have to be tracked. And that's up in the air. But it's often, that 4.7 million is often not thought about. So in all reality, at any given moment, and this is probably a good average, 6.9 million people are involved in the criminal justice system in one way, shape, or form. Now just let that sink in. And that is everything from a serial murderer to a 19-year-old kid that got arrested for possession of marijuana. It's something to think about. What can we do to reduce this number? Well, legalizing marijuana could be one way. Treatment courts are another great way. I worked with the homeless court in Springfield, Missouri, and it was a very effective means. You have drug courts, you have veterans courts, you have DUI courts. And these diversion practices have proved to be successful, but they can be more time consuming and at times more expensive. But we go back to what I said about going to the training academy in Missouri, where they discuss at least a third to a half of the offenders in prison or on probation and parole in Missouri would actually benefit more from mental health help and effective drug rehabilitation than they do from prison. And working inside a prison, you really see and understand why this is the case, because many have underlying issues, and those underlying issues are what lead them to commit the crimes they do or to self-medicate. And when they begin to self-medicate with marijuana, then later they move to other things, or because of a legitimate accident or injury, they're prescribed opiates, and that becomes an addiction. And when they can't get opiates anymore, they turn to heroin. And now with mixing fentanyl into heroin, they're causing more overdoses, they're causing more hospitalizations, which in the end cost us more than a drug rehabilitation would have cost to begin with. And drug rehabilitation is not a one-time thing. There are people who may have to go to rehab 6 or 7 times before they finally get to the point where they don't want it anymore. They want a new life. Or you have others, and you see this a lot within the prison system, they'll parole out or they'll even finish their sentence and owe nobody anything, and they will go back to the same neighborhoods and the same friends and the same family that led them on the road to addiction to begin with. And we still haven't addressed the underlying issue that led them to the addiction, which often is a mental health issue. You see a lot working with homeless. But in the prison system, it's in your face every day. And when you actually talk to some of these offenders, they will tell you the mistake I made was when I got out last time, I went back and lived in the same house I lived in before, surrounded by the same people who were still addicted, who had made no changes in their lives. And there was a phrase I used the other day. If you sit in a room and you look around your friends and you see no goals, no goals, no goals, no goals, then maybe we need to assist them in finding better surroundings. Because you can be the smartest person in the world, and if you're the smartest person in that room and you're surrounded by dumbasses, how smart really are you? They're not going to challenge you to do better. And as these offenders leave the system, we've done nothing to make them better. Let's get into the segregation portion of this. Now, jails, prisons, whether state or federal, all have some sort of segregation, what used to be referred to as solitary confinement. Well, it's rare for it to be solitary now. There are a few cases. Somebody's under investigation. Many times they're under investigation for gang ties or introducing contraband into the institution, or they're under investigation for PREA, which stands for the Prison Rape Elimination Act. Because once that investigation starts, they have to be single-celled. But for the most part, it's 2 people to a cell, unless there's a reason. And the way it breaks down, you have protective custody, which is, there's a reason they fear being on the main yard. And many times I worked in a receiving diagnostic prison, so you'd have people that would come in with predatory charges, and they would request protective custody based on their charges, because they knew, as many people do, life is not great for an offender with those type of charges. You also have inmates coming in that are much older or much younger who have a fear for their safety before they ever make it to the yard. You have disciplinary segregation. This is somebody who has committed an offense within the prison, and they've been written up for that violation, and they've been sentenced to 10, 15, 20, 30 days. And then they will go to segregation, they'll do their time, and then they'll be let out back to the Hill to whatever housing unit they're sent to. But you also have the biggest block is administrative segregation. Now, administrative segregation is, we talked about the investigations. That's considered administrative segregation. If somebody requests protective custody, they will initially be put in because it's mandatory. Once they ask for it, we have to bring them to the protective custody wing. And then the prison I worked in, it was on Tuesdays and Thursdays, they'd have segregation hearings, which is we would look at why they wanted protective custody and decide whether or not they would remain in protective custody or be sent back to the Hill. Then you have, we talked about disciplinary segregation. Well, when they're initially written up, if it's a serious enough offense, then they will be put in segregation, but they're considered administratively confined. And then once that hearing happens, you decide what their sentence is. We talked about the investigations. The other part of ours, which was slightly different, was we have what we're called watch cells. And these are people who had either attempted to or had expressed, or in one case, a phone call from an offender and his girlfriend when they were breaking up. He told her he was going to hurt himself. So they're placed on suicide watch, which means they're in a cell by themselves that's monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with cameras. And the corrections officers are required to visually see that they were okay and they were breathing and they were alive and not trying to hurt themselves 5 times an hour. No more than 15 minutes apart. Now, when they initially go in, they're given a tear-proof smock, which we refer to as a ninja suit, a Ninja Turtle suit, and they gradually gain clothes back and blankets, and once they work with the mental health department and they realize they're safe to themselves. And they'll stay in there for a few days, up to, I've seen people in there as much as almost 3 weeks, because they would not work with and talk to the mental health professionals that were trying to talk them through. And personally, as they came in, if I was on shift, I would talk them through how the system works. Yes, you have your SMOC, but they're going to come in and talk to you. And if you're compliant and you're working with them, then eventually you'll get boxers and a t-shirt and blankets. Then you'll get pants, you'll get a little bit more, and they'll talk to you a bit, and then you'll go back to a regular cell. And when they feel you're not a threat to yourself, then they can send you to a regular housing unit. And many times you see them bounce back and forth, but that goes back to the underlying mental illness. You also have people there who, what is basically, I was told the other day that it's actually an official diagnosis now, but it's a meth-induced psychosis because of the changes to the brain it's done by continual use of methamphetamines. What I have also seen, and this goes back to the solitary confinement argument saying it's cruel and unusual, was somebody being investigated for gang ties that spent almost 60 days single-celled, and the only contact he truly had, if it wasn't yelling back and forth through the door, was when we would walk by doing security checks or when we would bring their food to them. And I watched a gradual decline in his mental stability as he sat there. So I would agree, the single cell, the old, but segregation exists, it exists for a reason. The true thing we need to think about is, what can we do to make the system better? It's not just releasing people. It's a holistic approach of improving education in some of our poorest areas. It is the community coming together as they did in the 30s and 40s and into the 50s to support each other. It is programs for single family homes. How can we constructively help them have a better outlook? With that being said, like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think about the channel. If you disagree with me, then hit dislike and tell me why in the comments. Everybody have a good evening, and I'll see you later.